Before everything collapsed, they were ordinary, and that was enough. They lived in a small apartment. Not new, not old. Just clean. They woke up early, took different buses, complained about the weather, and met again at night with the quiet confidence of people who believed effort was rewarded. They talked about children like the future was guaranteed. They argued about small things because they could afford to. Back then, love didn't feel urgent. It felt permanent. The word IMF entered their lives like background noise. It came through television panels and newspaper headlines. Currency, debt, bailouts. Things that sounded distant, technical and foreign. They didn't panic. Korea had survived worse, people said. So they nodded and went to work the next day. What they didn't know was that the ground had already started to move. Right at work, the husband was called for a meeting which was held, and the meeting lasted less than 10 minutes where he got fired. No accusations. No anger. Just a bow. A formal apology. And a cardboard box. 30 years of routine collapsed into items he could carry with one hand. When he stepped outside the building, the city looked the same. That was the strangest part. The world didn't react to the end of his life as he knew it. That night, they sat at the kitchen table. Then his wife cheered him up and said, "It's okay. It's temporary." He repeated it back to her. Not because he believed it, but because saying it out loud felt like protection. They used savings. They caught small comforts. They smiled gently like people afraid of cracking glass. For a while, pretending worked. After a while, her shop lasted 3 months longer than his confidence. When it closed, she didn't cry. She just stood there, staring at the metal shutter like it might change its mind. That was the day the apartment became smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. The walls seemed closer. The air heavier. Silence moved in and refused to leave. He was worried. Friends didn't vanish suddenly. They became busy. Calls stopped. Invitations faded. Concerns turned into distance. People don't know how to stand near failure. It makes them nervous. Soon, it was just the two of them. And the problem they couldn't escape. It was heartbreaking. Not long after, a family meeting was called. No one ever said the word divorce. They said things like, "You're still young. Starting over isn't shameful. Sometimes it's wiser to let go." Wiser. As if love were a bad investment. They nodded politely. Then went home and said nothing. Divorce felt heavier than poverty. Living meant admitting that they had failed twice. Once to the economy. And once to each other. So they stayed. Not because things were improving. But because living felt like erasing the meaning of endurance. Time stopped moving forward and began circling. Temporary jobs. Night shifts. Back pain. Headaches. Insomnia. They started measuring life in bills and meals. Love didn't disappear dramatically. Quietly. Like fabric worn by years of friction. They argued, but without heat. About electricity. About food. About things that didn't matter. They avoided the real subject because it had no solution. Silence became safer than honesty. That's when he knew something was dying, but he didn't know what to do. One night, he came home late. She was sitting on the floor. Lights off. Back against the wall. She didn't ask where he has been. She just said, "If you leave now, everything I endured becomes meaningless." That sentence closed the last door. From then on, staying felt mandatory. Living felt cruel. He began drinking, not to forget. To pause. Alcohol slowed the thoughts. Muted the weight of responsibility. But it also loosened something else. Patience. They argued again. He doesn't remember the words but. He remembered the sound. He hit his hands on the table out of anger and she flinched. That sound, the flinch, ended whatever illusion they were still protecting. In that moment, he saw himself clearly. And he hated what he saw. Later that night, his wife collapsed in the bathroom. Stress doesn't scream. It shut systems down quietly. He rushed in and took her to the hospital. He was scared she was going to leave him. At the hospital, everything smelled sterile and final. He sat alone looking at the woman who had refused to leave him, holding her hands while he gave a gentle smile, hoping for a better future. The bill arrived a week later. He stared at it longer than he stared at his wife in the hospital. That's the part he don't forgive himself for. He felt less like a man. It dawned on him, but something has to be done. And in the end, they didn't divorce. Not because they healed. Not because love returned. But because living would mean admitting the suffering had been wasted. And they had already lost too much to afford that truth. People think love keeps people together. Sometimes it's fear. Fear of loneliness. Fear of regret. Fear of admitting that endurance didn't lead anywhere. They didn't stay married because they were strong. They stayed because they were trapped. Together. In the ruins. And this is what is called true love.